Hello and welcome. Please fasten your seatbelts and set your phones to airplane mode. Today on the Flightline, the North American F-86 Sabre. My name's Jacob and I'll be your captain as we take a look at the Sabre jet. On October 1st of 1947, the Sabre prototype first took to the skies, and only 2 years later the iconic jet fighter became operational with the United States Air Force. The transonic jet fighter that would define an era of aviation is known for its striking swept wings and gorgeous bare metal and yellow striped paintwork, and for a gallant service in the Korean War as the Western fighter best able to counter the Soviet-built MiG-15s. The Sabre is 37 feet 1 inch long with a wingspan of 39 feet and 1 inch. Empty, she weighed only 11,000 pounds, but her max takeoff weight was 18,000 pounds. She was powered by the General Electric J-47 turbojet engine, producing 5,910 pounds of thrust. For armament, the jet was equipped with 6 Browning M3 50 caliber machine guns, and could optionally be fitted with a wide variety of rockets, bombs, napalm, and even in theory, tactical nuclear weapons. Throughout its service life, the Sabre saw a stunning 34 total variants, including those made by CAC and Canadair for Australia and Canada. These variants featured engine, equipment, and armament upgrades. The Australian CAC Sabre was fitted with a Rolls-Royce engine producing 60% more thrust than the J-47 in the American jets, as well as 2 Aden 30mm cannons instead of its 6 machine guns. The Canadair Sabre was also re-engined with Avro Canada Orenda 14 engines producing 7,275 pounds of thrust. Both the CAC and Canadair Sabres had variants with pylons for early versions of the Sidewinder missile. Variants of the Sabre were operated by 13 countries around the world, and the jet saw active service as late as 1980 with the Pakistani Air Force. Operationally, it saw service in 4 different conflicts and flew in nearly all global environments, from the Canadian Arctic to the tropics of the Philippines. It was in United States Air Force service when war broke out in the Korean Peninsula. Seeking to stop communist expansion, the United States and other UN countries came to South Korea's aid. As part of the Western response, Sabres were deployed. In Korea, the Sabre served to maintain air superiority. At the onset of the Korean War, the Sabre's straight-wing contemporaries were able to counter North Korean aircraft well, achieving many air victories. A few months later, however, at the introduction of the Soviet-built MiG-15 to North Korean service, straight-winged fighters such as the F-80 and the F-84 were at a stark disadvantage. It became the duty of the swept-wing Sabre to keep MiG Alley, an area near Pyongyang in North Korea, clear for Western forces. The MiG-15 was more maneuverable, flew higher, and accelerated faster than the Sabre, but the F-86's more powerful engine allowed it to outdive the MiG-15, and it was marginally faster. It was also helped greatly by the addition of a radar-ranged gun sight. Skilled Sabre pilots could regularly bring down North Korean MiGs using a combination of these advantages and skills, learned in both grueling training at Nellis Air Force Base and in P-51s during the Second World War. In contrast, North Korean MiG pilots, and Soviet pilots who flew in their places sometimes, lacked combat experience and training to the extent held by Sabre pilots. Over the course of the war, Sabres were credited with shooting down 792 MiGs at a loss of only 78 Sabres in air-to-air combat. Internally, after the war, the US Air Force performed a study on the performance of the Sabre, and accepted that their Sabre pilots had likely downed closer to 200 MiGs. The Chinese, Soviets, and North Koreans claim to have lost a combined 659 MiGs total, many to Sabres. 40 Sabre pilots earned the title of ace during the war, and the aircraft had a stellar 10-to-1 kill-death ratio by wartime estimates. At the end of the Korean War, the F-86F was in service, this variant being much more closely matched to the MiG-15, and thusly widening the performance gap between Communist and American forces even further. The F-86 could occasionally break the speed of sound in dives, something MiGs could not do. This was taken advantage of by Sabre pilots, who began to perfect the boom and zoom technique, diving fast on a MiG lower than them, before continuing the dive and speeding away. The F-86 also uniquely has a recorded kill against another F-86. During the Korean War, Major James Jabara accidentally mistook his own wingman, Lieutenant Dick Fraley, also in a Sabre, for a MiG-15 and fired a burst from his machine guns, thus disabling Fraley's aircraft. Both men were experienced combat pilots, and Jabara was the third-ranking American ace of the war. Before ejecting, Fraley lamented over the radio at the prospect of losing an expensive camera he had bought in an attempt to take stills of a MiG-15. Fraley landed unharmed, but with his feet wet in the Yellow Sea, and was rescued by an amphibious plane. The F-86 ended service with the United States Air Force in 1965, but continued to be operated internationally until 1980, when it was retired by the Pakistani Air Force. Today, you can still see many of the original 9,860 F-86s flying at air shows around the world as a warbird and a tribute to the most produced Western jet in history. I hope you enjoyed this episode of On the Flightline. If you did, please consider subscribing. If you have a suggestion for a plane you'd like to see us cover soon, leave it in a comment. Thanks for watching, and remember, you can always go around.